Hey, what's up, everybody? So it's been a while since I've made a video, and I apologize for that. I also haven't written much recently. I've been very wrapped up in studying Hebrew for my school and a lot of other things. It's not a good excuse, but I have had a couple of things going on in my mind that I've wanted to talk about and things that I've wanted to make videos about, but I just haven't gotten around to it. And so when I sat down today to make a video, I thought to myself, what should I do a video on? There's several things. I really want to do a video on tzitzit, and whether or not tzitzit are, I don't know, for today. And I've been in some conversations with people specifically on the topic of tzitzit. So that video is coming soon, probably next week. And if you have ideas or if you have a position on whether or not tzitzit should be worn today by believers, I would love to hear it and why you believe one way or the other. Because I've heard from both sides, but I always like to hear more opinions. Okay, so today let's talk about mental illness. This is a touchy subject, and the reason why is because especially in our time and in our culture, mental illness seems to be I think it's on the rise, especially if we take into consideration things like depression and anxiety and things like this. Are these forms of mental illness? And one of the things that I need to say right away is that I know people who struggle from mental illness. I know people who struggle from really severe mental illness, and I've talked to people who are schizophrenic and so on and so forth. So I'm not denying in any way, shape, or form that there is real mental illness. I'm also not saying that it's not a real struggle. It certainly is a real struggle. What I'm looking at today is what is the law of God, what does the law and the covenant say about mental illness? And then we could even take that into other realms. What does the Bible say about mental illness? Now, the Bible does talk about mental illness, but almost every time that it talks about mental illness, what it's talking about is someone who's afflicted with something. All right. So it doesn't really address what to do with mental illness. Now, the reason I started thinking about this is because there was a news story that I heard on the radio the other day, and I forget what the details were, but there was someone who was being tried for murder, and they said that they didn't know if this person was going to be able to stand trial because they didn't know if he was mentally fit to stand trial. And that got me thinking, what does the scripture say about being mentally fit? Is there a way that we could interpret the scriptures or see the scriptures as saying that somebody's not mentally fit to stand trial? The answer straight away is no, there's not. In fact, and the other question that comes from that, so another avenue that comes from that, is the question of, okay, well, if we say that everyone needs to stand trial, whether or not they are mentally ill or not, for any crime that they have committed, then what about the mentally ill plea? In other words, a person says, well, I can't be held responsible because I'm mentally ill. I have a mental illness that should make me exempt. Well, once again, the Torah, the law of God, doesn't seem to have any. There's no plea of this kind. And so I think that this, once again, is a difference in the law of God versus the American law system. Now, one of the things that I've done recently is I've tried to compare or tried to think about and tried to understand what it would be like if America all of a sudden one day just decided that they were going to start following the law of God instead of the law of the land today. So all of the officials decided, hey, we're going to start following the law of God. And eventually, I believe that this will actually happen when the Lord reigns from Israel. Right, the law will go forth from Jerusalem. And so I believe that the world will be governed by the law of God. So what does that look like? Well, this is one of those places where we see a complete difference in the law of God from the U.S. law code. And so basically, we have not too many places where we hear of madness within the Torah. In fact, there's really only two places that we hear of madness in the Bible, and I'm taking madness to mean mental illness of some kind, right? So in Deuteronomy 28, now remember, this is the place where God has laid out his covenant, and now he's talking about the blessing and the curses. So the beginning of Deuteronomy 28, we have a couple of blessings, the blessings that will come if you keep the covenant of God. If you are a covenant member, you keep the covenant of God. These are the blessings that are going to come on you. And then it switches gears, and we have the curses that come on people who don't keep the law of God. Now, I know there are lots of arguments that we could get into on whether or not this only applies to people in the land, whether or not this only applies to people who are covenant members, or whether it applies to people who are not covenant members. Will the people who are not covenant members be judged according to the covenant itself? And what if, if so, then how does that work outside the land? There's all sorts of disagreements and arguments and agreements, and there's a lot of fun conversations that we could have all about that. But for now, let's just look at the law itself. So let's pretend for a few seconds that maybe we're in the land, or that the law of God applies to us outside of the land. I personally am a theonomist, so I do believe that the law of God applies outside of the land for believers particularly, and that ultimately God will judge unbelievers according to his law at some point, right? And that people will be held accountable according to his law. So a little background just in case you're new to me and this channel. So what do we have in the Torah? Well, in Deuteronomy 28:28, it says, "The Lord will strike you." This is once again talking about the curses that will come upon a person who doesn't keep the law. And actually, let me add. Give me just a second here. I want to bring up another Bible translation. We'll go ESV, and I'm going to look at Deuteronomy 28. We're going to start just a little bit earlier, and let's see here. So let's start in 25. "The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and you shall be a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth." Now remember that he's already deep into the curses. So if you'd like to read, starting with the curses, then you need to start earlier in 28. But right now I'm in 28:26. "And your dead body shall be food for all birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth, and there shall be no one to frighten them away. Then the Lord will strike you with the boils of Egypt, and with tumors and scabs and itch of which you cannot be healed. The Lord will strike you with madness and blindness and confusion of mind." Now, this is the only place in the Torah itself, in the first 5 books of Moses, or the first 5 books of the Bible, that we have this form of shagah, which is the Hebrew word they're translating here, madness. Now, we do see this again. We see this in Ecclesiastes 1:17. We see the same word in it's throughout Ecclesiastes. In fact, he likes this term. 2:12, Ecclesiastes 2:12, Ecclesiastes 7:7, and Ecclesiastes 7:25, Ecclesiastes 9:3, he uses it, and Ecclesiastes 10:13. So, and then going on outside of Ecclesiastes, we do have it in Zechariah 12:4. And so this is the only place in the Torah that this inflection of shagah is used. Okay, so we do see it again, though. We see it again in 28:34. So later on, down, it says, "The nation that you have," this is in 33, "the nation that you have not known shall eat up the fruit of your ground and of all your labors, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed continually, so that you are driven mad by the sights that your eyes see." Now, same word, different inflection, right? And for those who maybe were raised in a Jewish home, or know some Hebrew, or maybe some Yiddish, so the word shagah is actually, we use this word, you might have heard the term, he's meshugana. Meshugana comes from shagah. So in this particular verse, verses 28:34, it says, "Vahita meshugah." He will be meshuga. He will be like a meshugana. He will be mad. He'll be so same kind of thing. Okay, And we do see this word. So there's different inflections of shagah throughout the scriptures. Okay. With that said, this is the only place that we see the term in the Torah. Now, what does this tell us? Does this mean that God doesn't care about mental illness? My answer to that is no. I don't think that is the case. In fact, I do think that God cares about our struggles, and I think that God cares about mental illness. In fact, when Jesus comes to earth, right, and he is dealing with people, he continually is freeing people from the oppression of demons. He's freeing people from whatever ailment they might have, which includes mental struggles. And so this is not to say that I think that mental illness is not something that we should not only take into consideration, but also something that we should really feel for people who struggle from mental illness. And I think that if you are struggling from mental illness, it's not that the Lord does not care about it. In fact, I think that if you go to the Psalms, you'll see that David and others, they really struggle with certain things in their life. They struggle with depression. They struggle with, with fear. They struggle with, possible anxiety. They struggle with other things. And then there are people throughout the scriptures that are seen as mad and or having mental illness. And so it's certainly not that the Lord is unaware of mental illness. But what is the point that I am trying to make? The point that I am trying to make is that mental illness, no matter how severe it may be, is not an excuse for breaking the law of God. In other words, God's standard applies to all people. And a person, according to God's law, is prosecuted, is brought before the judges or the elders, no matter if they are mentally fit or not, whether or not they have. So we could bring this into a modern scenario. If somebody does horrific things and kills 5 or 6 people, and then says, well, the voices in my head told me to do it, and they are evaluated and come to find out they have severe mental illness. According to the Torah, the crime that has been committed still deserves punishment. It still requires that person pay for the crime that has been committed. And in that case, the Torah requires that the person would pay with their life, right? So a person can have remorse, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have to pay the price for what they've done. According to the Torah, a person can say, "Well, I'm sorry, I feel bad, I ask forgiveness," but that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have to pay the price or the penalty that the Torah requires. And so in instance where we see things like murder, or we see things like things that require capital punishment, rape, or whatever it may be, kidnapping, these things require capital punishment. And according to the Torah, according to God's law, we don't see that mental illness is an excuse for these things. If a person breaks the law of God, they break the law of God. Now, once again, I think it does need to be stated that if a person is struggling with mental illness, we should definitely try to help them in whatever way we can. And if you are struggling with mental illness, then I would suggest finding a pastor or a spiritual, a Christian leader that can help you work through those things. If it's severe, then maybe even more help, a psychiatrist or something like that may be able to help you. I always recommend that people go to believers in the field, whether it's psychiatry or something else. Find a believer that can help you, because a lot of the time I think that there is not all the time, this needs to be made very clear, not all the time, but some of the time there is some crossover between spiritual struggles, spiritual warfare, and mental illness. All right, so if you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. You can leave them on this video, or you can put them in the Pronomian theology discussion group on Facebook, and we would love to discuss it. I will be back next week, where I believe I will be talking about tzitzit. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.